Happy New Year, everybody, for those of you that stuck around. Nice new year, new opportunities, new platforms. I listened to a little bit of the Sony talk and Marty talking about the Gear VR and a little bit about Oculus Go. Really interesting how I work for AMD, so very much PC centric and oriented, and that's been sort of my career. I've been at a lot of different tech companies, NVIDIA, Microsoft, and AMD. Seeing 20 to 1,000 vertices limit or the target that's challenging. Especially challenging when you're trying to do a product that's going to cross platforms and give people the best possible experience. So anyway, this is not a technical talk. And I'm not offended. That's okay, good. Anyway, I said I work for AMD. I've been in the technology business for a long time. As I mentioned, in the early days, I actually used to make games. I worked at a company called Sierra Online. Most of you are probably not old enough to remember, but we used to make PC games and adventure games and things that have variously, well, Telltale's probably the only company that's done a good job at getting them back on different platforms. But then I transitioned into, I actually was trying to build a 3D, it's embarrassing to call it the name of it, but it was a product called Cyberpark, which back in those days really wasn't overused. It was a fully immersive 3D environment, and we had no 3D hardware, so that was fun trying to do that in software rendering. But anyway, I got involved in 3D hardware, trying to figure out how to do this Cyberpark product, and went to work at ATI, and then NVIDIA, then Microsoft, and I worked at a few startups. And now I'm back at AMD, which is essentially ATI. Those of you that remained, how many of you are developers? So almost all of you, ish, okay. And you guys are building VR product? Is that your focus? Okay. That's another thing, actually. I like actually what Pocket Gamer's done here with XR, because there's a lot of talk about mixed reality. I'm not really sure what that is. Because you either have a thing closed up on your head or you have something that you can see through. That's more mixed reality to me than a VR headset. But anyway, the concentration on what I'm going to talk about is actually, I'm a little concerned, and I've seen a bunch of, I like to say that 97.4% of all statistics are made up on the spot, and we all hear various things. Like Nick Parker spoke yesterday and gave a lot of statistics about what the installed base is going to be this year, what it was last year, what it's going to be by 2020. And I've got a bunch of numbers on here about that too. Okay, this is basically just a start screen that shows what's happened in the last 100 and some odd plus years. For the most part, we've been on the outside looking in through a window, and VR, MR, and AR, and all the other Rs allow us to kind of step through that and have a much more immersive experience. To the point of, with a VR headset, and AR for that matter, we're not used to having to turn and look behind us to see, whatever the game is or the experience is, somebody sneaking up behind you. Again, with all the, I think it's 98.4% of all statistics are made up on the spot. John Petty, I think, or it was Ars Technica, said there's going to be an estimated 100 million consumers over the next 10 years with VR, specifically with VR. I don't know, is it? Right now, I don't know that that's the case, if we're on track to that. Again, Nick's prediction, I think, about Daydream was somewhere in 10 million by 2020. So it's close, but there's a lot of other platforms coming out. There's a lot of other things that are in the mix, and things are slow to adopt, at least in my opinion. The guys who are really the ones who drive what this is, platforms, I've been in the console side of things as well. When consoles launch, we'll go to the next thing here. When consoles launch, up until the point a console or a new platform launches, everybody cares about what the speeds and feeds are, what how many gigaflops or what kind of inputs and all that kind of stuff there is. Once the console launches, it's what game is available next, what's the best title that's going to be around. These numbers are from John Petty. This is estimates before the beginning of 2017, what we were going to hit. It was close. I don't know that we hit all of those numbers, but it was fairly close. I think PSVR seemed to be the one that got the most notice and has certainly the most content. Anyway, this is some, again, more statistics. This is from IDC worldwide. Those are in hundreds of units or thousands of units. Total, it says 2.2 million. So you can argue with them if you think those numbers are correct or not. You can find that on the internets. And the challenge here is, what are the impediments to growth, right? I got a question. How many of you own a VR headset? Okay. How many, obviously, have you all tried them? Everyone? Yeah, okay, good. That helps. Have you guys, anyone tried Microsoft? Are you developing a product for the Microsoft mixed reality headset? Okay. How about AR? HoloLens, anyone? Just curious, okay. Good. Magic Leap? Yeah, I know. I was lucky enough to see the demos last year. They're very impressive. I'm waiting for hardware too. So anyway, impediments to growth. The installed base, I kind of talked about that. You know, it's the old chicken and the egg. When are there enough people to make it worthwhile enough for you to build content for the platform? You know, the early adopters and the pioneers tend to often get the rewards, but they also get the arrows and the ire, so to speak. Wearing a big thing on your head, I think it's yet to be determined whether having a device strapped to your head that's 2+ pounds, perhaps even more, is something that you can do for a continual, ongoing basis. You know, there's issues with access and experience. It's difficult for the general populace to try something out. I know the prices have come down, but a year ago and when things launched in 2014, or well, we announced things in 2014, they became mostly commercially available in 2016. The average consumer would either have to plop down $500 to $600 plus have a PC strong enough to be able to support the experience without often having ever tried anything or seeing if they like the experience, if the game content is what they're looking for, or if it makes them motion sick. I don't know about you guys, but, and again, Marty talked a little bit about that, about how to optimize and eliminate that, but depending on the game and obviously how well the system runs, I've gotten semi-motion sickness, and I know a lot of people who it really affects. I think that's an area that is going to require a lot of thought, work, and better hardware, which again we're working on at AMD. Discoverability. This isn't a problem just for VR. This is a problem across the entire industry for games. The number of games that are shipped constantly is difficult to find where you've got user reviews, you've got professional reviews, you've got 1 to 5 stars on all of the stores, but it's still difficult to find out which is good, where the good content is, and it's a problem I have no solution for. But if you do, then you probably could make a lot of money with that. Wires and tethered devices. AMD acquired a company, Nitero, about a year ago, that's working on a wireless VR solution. We haven't shown anything on it, but it shows great promise, and we're working with most of the headset manufacturers to try and figure out how to implement that. I think that's one of the impediments too, is first of all, having a room big enough. That's always a challenge. I know they say it's about a 10 by 10 space. I don't know about you guys, but allocating that much open space for just VR in a room it's expensive just for the floor space. And then having the wires and all the setup with the sensors and everything else, it makes it a bit of a challenge, at least for the average user. External compute devices being required. The Gear VR and there's a bunch of devices coming out within the next year or so. Mentioned the Oculus Go. There's the Oculus Santa Cruz. There's the Vive thing that I forgot the name of right now. And then there's, I think Samsung's got a new one coming out. There's some other things that have been hinted at but not yet announced. That's kind of an impediment. Resolution. I think resolution, when I was speaking about the motion sickness component, I think, pardon me, I think resolution makes a big difference there. The higher the resolution, the less potential for motion sickness, at least in most of the tests and things that we've done. That's a huge issue. As fast as we make faster CPUs and GPUs, it's still not fast enough to be able to make this really in-depth, immersive experience with the highest possible resolution. I think we're moving in that direction, but again, it's Moore's law squared or divided. I'm not sure which it is. I don't do math. Sorry. Resolution. Anyway, that's an issue that's as hardware moves forward. That's something with this one really bugs me. Crazy overhype expectations. I think we've been a victim of that. I've sadly have been involved in several new platforms or technologies where that's happened. I work for a company called OnLive, which was a cloud gaming service. I think crazy overhyped expectations speaks really well to what happened to them. But I think that's an issue too, and I think that we set expectations of users who, I mentioned the users who haven't had access to it or used it. They see reviews and videos and the cover of Time magazine and things that say how VR is going to be the thing, and then when they try it, they go like, I think I saw this in the 90s. And it's you know, I think your parents probably all told you that you only get a first chance for a first impression, you know. I've seen a lot of talk about VR 2.0 with the new devices that are coming out. There's big hope for Google Daydream. I haven't tried it yet. I think a lot of people are, again, the overhyped expectations. I think it's a challenge. I think we need to be realistic about it and tell people that this is an iterative process and that it's like television. We've all put up with television from, well, maybe you guys haven't, you're young folks, but back in the days, I honestly remember a day when there was only black and white. That's how old I am. So, and to this day, where there are little tiny things that you can hang on the wall that weigh about 5 pounds and have, you know, 4G or 8G, sorry, 4K or 8K and HDR and you know, incredible graphics where, you know, we used to not have that. So, and then anything else. There's just a number of other things that are impediments to growth for, I think, for VR or XR, if we want to use that terminology. But I think the promise is there. I think there's great potential. Some of the things that we've seen, the games that I've seen, a game I've spent a fair amount of time with is Robo Recall from Epic. Great game. And a number of other ones. I mean, there's, you know, oh gosh, I can't think of the name of it. The Paranormal Activity was another one that the graphics, they did a good job, and I think that's the trick, the things that you guys, what makes you magicians is the fact that you use tricks and ways to make games appear better than what the actual resolution of the product you're displaying it on are, and using tricks and techniques to tell the story and the immersive experience or the emotion that you're trying to draw from the user. So these are the ones I mentioned earlier. So you've got Google Daydream, you've got Oculus Go and Santa Cruz and the Vive product I can't remember the name of. I apologize to HTC. And then whatever else might come along. So those, you know, those platforms are going to be new. Some obviously people are developing for them now. They're going to be coming out sometime this year. You're going to see interesting products. The other thing is the complexity of the number of platforms, the matrix of devices that you have to or would want to build platforms, product for is getting more and more complex. It's not getting less complex. So I mentioned performance earlier. You know, currently 90 frames per second, about 8 teraflops of compute power is what we have today. To get as close to what the eye sees, we need about 743 teraflops. That's possible, but not wearable on your head. So Nat Brown mentioned, he's like, you know, it's great for companies like AMD and our competitors because there's a whole lot of business there and headway for us to innovate and build product that eventually gets to that point. But it's still a challenge because that doesn't exist today. And again, I think the expectations, the overhyped, crazy overhyped expectations I mentioned are challenging because again, I think people expect to see the 743 teraflops and they get the 8 teraflops, and there's a big difference. When you see big pixels on the screen, it's not good. Although I used to build stuff in CGA and EGA, so you may not know what that is, but it's not great. Being that I am from AMD, I feel it's incumbent upon me to do a gratuitous AMD commercial. And actually, it's semi-interesting. AMD has been a leader in graphics for a long time. We've actually not been present in the CPU space for a long time, but we launched a couple of products last year. I'll go back to that one, but Ryzen, the Ryzen desktop APU, CPU, mobile APUs, and Ryzen Pro, which is for commercial space. If you haven't heard, they're very competitive. They're very cost-effective. We have a product called Threadripper, which has a ridiculous number of cores and threads. Most of these do have at least 4 cores, 8 threads. Performance is great. We match or eclipse the competitor out there. And then on the GPU side, we recently launched Vega. We've announced Navi, and then the next generation beyond that. The other thing that we're doing in both CPU and GPU is moving from 14 nanometer to 7 nanometer. Again, what that does is lowers the amount of power required, lowers the amount of heat that's produced, which allows, again, smaller and smaller devices, longer battery life. And so the promise of having these devices, these self-contained computing devices that you're able to wear perhaps longer and with more comfort is nearer. So one of the things I do want to talk about and leave you with is changing experiences. I talked a little bit about this. I actually talk about this a lot because it's something that I'm very passionate about. I mentioned I worked at Sierra Online. There was a division called the Imagination Network, which was an online massive multiplayer game network, if you consider 75,000 people massive. At the time it was dial-up. This was before the internet. It was before broadband and everything else. But I was the head of QA, and I had a user who was a beta tester named Polywog. And we used to refresh beta users all the time just to get new people in, new hardware, and sort of make sure that there was a good spectrum of people testing. I got a phone call from a woman. She said, "You don't know me, but I'm Polywog's caregiver." I said, "Okay." She said, "Well, what you don't know about Polywog is he's a quadriplegic. And the only way that he interacts with the outside world, because he's in a device and table, is through the Imagination Network." It's a pretty powerful concept, the fact that something like that could give someone access to. And I played, it was a very basic service. We had card and board games and some real basic RPG type stuff. But I remember playing poker and some other stuff with Polywog, and he typed a little slower, but didn't know anything different about him. That gave me this real sort of core belief that the technology that we're building for games is really actually something that we have yet to expand and use into other ways. The picture up here, and if you've read that, it's basically there are a couple of programs going on where people who are paraplegics, they have a VR program, and it's people who have lost motion of their legs in the military or through accidents. Mentions here a 32-year-old woman. She was paralyzed for 13 years. She's regained partial control of her limbs through this, and it's an arduous program. You can see the suit that I don't know if that's the woman or I think it is. It's Duke University in the U.S. And she and a number of other patients have regained they've rebuilt neural pathways using this device, using VR and the devices that they've used that. I don't know, to me that's a miracle, and the promise of being able to do that with the technology that we have, and then using that to entertain people and engage people. I don't know, I think, we're on the right track. I hope that anything AMD can do to help, and I'll be around. You can talk to me if you have questions or whatever, and we can do some questions here, I think, if we have time. I want to skip that one. So yeah, my question, who's making the next killer app for VR? I hope you all are. Thanks.
Big round of applause for Chris. time for one question, if anyone has any. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just like running to this. It's good. I'm not going to the gym today.
Thank you for that excellent presentation. I wanted to get your thoughts on kind of built from the ground up VR experiences versus what we're seeing or what we saw last year. Like a location-based, you mean, or? Yeah, but also more along the lines of last year we saw some big titles coming across such as Skyrim, Doom, Fallout, and they had some work done to them, but pretty much they were very much kind of like a port. And so your talk was looking at kind of like the killer app. What's your opinion on ports versus, kind of built from the ground up experiences, and where should we be investing our time in making that killer app?
I mean, I think ports have value, but in any situation where you either port a console game to PC or a PC game to console, there's a level of compromise. And it's going to be the same with VR. If you want to really be exploitive about with a platform using the control schemes and unique characteristics and capabilities and adapt and build your product specifically for that, moving it to another platform where the control schemes are different is going to be a challenge. It can be done, but I don't know that you're ever going to have, and again, this is Chris's opinion, not the AMD, opinion, but I think it's always going to be a compromise. There's some clever people who have done a really good job of doing a lot of cross-platform stuff, but I think it's very challenging, and I think, I'm not saying just pick a platform and go with it, but I think there are inherent issues, like I mentioned, that it goes back to the installed base that I was talking about earlier. Right now, there's not a big installed base on any one particular platform, so you've got to try and get as many of them as you can. At some point there may be, and at some point maybe all of them will be, and people will be able to build bespoke content just for that. But in the meantime, I think it's going to be a challenge. I think the other part of it is the clever people are going to find out what the overlap is for all of those components for the platform and be able to build something that meets as much of that as possible.